Okay, so obviously Stuart will know this because he's very intelligent and tuned in psychic.
Okay, that was a giveaway.
Well, we thought that the way that we would approach
And
this...
who's the we?
Me, sorry, Adamo, myself, and Emily when she arrives, but also now Stuart, if Stuart is amenable, that we would just have this as a discussion sort of between ourselves, which people are free to jump into at any point, basically. Broadly speaking, we sort of divided it up between the three of us, so I looked at the introduction, Adamo looked at chapter 1, and Emily looked at chapter 2. Stuart has the overview and has looked at all of those chapters, so he is able to contribute equally to all parts.
Nice recovery. Good.
Okay, so the introduction. Obviously, I felt that the first place to start would be by actually watching Copenhagen. So I found it on YouTube in 9 parts, a really terrible student production, however, useless. Because as is always the way when you're reading these things and then they're sort of referring to other people, I always feel the need to read around it, which means that the reading then takes 3 times as long as I think it's going to. So I watched this, and many things sort of came out of it. I mean, doing that exercise really illuminated what Barad was saying about the issues, the shortfalls that she sort of perceives in the way that the play is told, not least of which being that that Frame was actually factually incorrect for some of it, because he was influenced by an account that was in turn influenced by the personalities involved, which I thought was interesting. And then refused to actually change his viewpoint even when he had that
Confronted with
evidence.
the facts.
Yeah. So I thought, okay, well that's interesting. There were bits of the play actually that spoke to my work specifically, so just in case it's of interest to anybody else, I'll sort of pull those out. There's a line in it where Heisenberg says, when he's just understanding the uncertainty principle and it's just coming to him, he says, "I'm so excited I keep making mistakes." And I thought, wow, this is great. I can use this. And then he says, "No, but then I get it." Oh, great. He says, "Yeah, by 3 a.m. I've got it, and suddenly I'm gazing through the surface of the atomic phenomena into a strangely beautiful interior world, a world of pure mathematical structures. I'm so excited I can't sleep." So I thought that was nice when she then talks about in chapter 1 the scanning tunneling microscope, that sort of, you have that sort of visual picture which they both sort of picked up, even though she talks about it being in terms of touch and he's talking about it being in terms of kind of a viewing. But there's this lovely exchange, sort of moving on, there's this lovely exchange between Bohr and Heisenberg at some point where Bohr says to Heisenberg, "You think so long as the mathematics works out, the sense doesn't matter." And Heisenberg says, "No, but mathematics is sense, and that's what sense is." And I thought that was a really crucial thing to sort of pull out of the play, which interestingly Barad doesn't mention.
It is a bit of a tautology.
Well, okay.
Or in fact a tautology.
Yes, but I thought it was nice.
But what does it mean then? What is mathematics, the sense of mathematics?
I felt that he was referring to the kind of the underpinning that mathematics applies to everything that has substance, and so sense is part of that.
So is it that the sense in mathematics is its use rather than mathematics in itself as an independent field that it produces some form of sense? That it's in the apparatus that mathematics, along with physics, starts to make sense.
Like produce sense.
That's Wittgenstein.
See, it was good to read Wittgenstein. But also, I heard that. But also, mathematics is often expressed as something that's elegant. there's often, its simplicity speaks of this thing called elegance. And the word elegant implies something that is not geometric or is not rigid, let's say. It might be geometric, but it's not rigid. And therefore there's something about this elegance that is either a precursor or a postcursor or going along with it as part of what is sense. So it gives it a beauty. They mean sense in a very old use of the term of in the old metaphysics of the beauty of something is its sense.
Okay.
And it can't be art unless it's beautiful, basically.
And pure mathematicians refer to maths as being beautiful.
Yes, absolutely. Because it is.
Yeah.
Because why? Sorry. Why is it beautiful?
Because it makes sense, I think, to them. I mean, I'm not a mathematician. My brain doesn't work like that at all.
I don't believe that.
But my son is a brilliant mathematician, and he always has been. And he gets like 100% in every test, unless he's stressed, and then he gets 99. He's literally can just do maths, which I just find incredible. He's just got a very mathematical brain.
Yeah.
But it in a sense, it is a sort of beautiful way of seeing, because it makes sense. There's always an answer.
It makes sense. So we're going to have to put that on the table, this thing about sense and having an answer and whether or not it's beautiful or elegant or tactile. But this is the key anyway. The key is to understand why mathematics and sense are linked in this bit here. Mattia, you want to say something?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Penrose.
What's his book, The Sonic Reality,
The Road to Reality.
The Sonic
It says
Reality.
in there, introduction song, it says that a lot of the mathematics in the middle of that is pretty ugly, it says. It's not all rainbows and daisies, is it, in the way of mathematics? Some of it is pretty, according to Mr. Penrose.
No, but I mean, the argument that he's saying that partly because of the level of the mathematics he's dealing with. But I mean, when you talk about specific kinds of statements, the norm is that it creates this sense, and the sense is a beauty. It's a beautiful sense, not even in its ugliness. It's still got this simplicity, or it's got something going on. But whether or not Penrose is into physics, which is
He's into metaphysics.
he's into metaphysics.
His idea of mathematics is one of metaphysics, of maths being a sort of a truth which sort of holds reality together.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess with the whole making sense, you have to be careful to stay clear of the truth. Making sense equaling truth, isn't it? Which is interesting.
See, Lucy, how this is like folding into your work immediately? Okay. No, good. Yeah.
Right, okay. So diving into the text then. I thought the first thing that struck me was when she's talking about, Frame sort of speaks in binaries. So sort of he bifurcates the social and the natural and the microscopic and the macroscopic and so through this sort of thing, because what she says is that he then tries to sort of draw analogy across the gap.
Who does?
Frame.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And that sort of stuck out to me because I was aware that in my own work I have to be very careful of not using analogy to close a perceived gap between things. I mean, Barad obviously goes on to explain that there is no gap, that, so that's a sort of a false premise to start
So
with.
just so we're all clear, what is an analogy? What does that word mean?
Analogy, I guess, is a way of using another premise to explain a certain premise that has sort of similar properties and works in a similar way but isn't actually the same thing.
Good. That was quite good.
Thank you.
Yeah, good. And
You look surprised.
sorry. I'm not surprised. I would have expected that, and in fact did. And then how did you get to the next part? And I shouldn't be the only one asking these questions.
It feels like an interview.
That's right. That's right. I'm just curious, what is this gap, not gap?
Well, she goes on to sort of say that the gap doesn't exist. It's more sort of an interstitial sort of relationship. So things kind of, and that's partly the sort of the uncertainty kind of model, I guess, is that, you know, if you
Come in.
so there's like position and momentum, and you can't fully know position if you know momentum, and you can't fully know momentum if you know position. So I sort of see that as a kind of a continuum, and therefore a sort of a set of interstices. I don't know whether that's me applying frameworks where they shouldn't be applied.
But she goes on about interaction, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Interaction.
Yeah.
As mixing the two together.
And what type of framework do you have to have in order that you don't have a gap? Either one or all of you could answer this.
You just leave identity behind in the sense that
She's back! Yes?
I think, and that's the idea about then the difference in itself as being something that moves forward all the time, continuously. So there is no gap in the sense that you have one state and then the other, and then there's something in between. And I think that's also why she's actually referring to intra and not inter.
So uncertainty isn't in between certainty and not knowing. It's something
State.
else.
It's to do with the cut, isn't it? I mean, she talks about cutting together. What she's trying to overcome is the cuts that do cut, that cut apart. So that's kind of a simplification in a way, isn't it? It's the cuts that divide.
It's the cut that's
fighting against in a way.
the cut that produces ontological separability between object and object. It's that sort of cut you also sort of get away from. The one
Okay,
that
before we go
Einstein's-
further, Anna, Lucy, Tadas, and Samira, what are you hearing? Because you're very quiet.
I've been thinking about, I mean, in the light of what was being spoken, like about the complementarity principle, which Barad raised, that actually, I don't know if you can talk about like that, you know, about identity, but you know that you have different ways of approaching the same thing depending on, you know, the apparatus, whatever, to which you examine, and they produce
Okay.
different sets. But you know,
I guess really my question is, maybe you're not in the question then on this one, maybe it's just Lucy, Samira, and Anna. Not to put you guys on the spot, because I don't mean it in a horrible way, but how do you hear these things like cut, ontology? Are they just like, do they sort of slide over your head, or, you know, it's okay, because we got to make sure that everybody's pulled along at the same time, and you're not allowed to speak. All right, so how do you hear this? Does it resonate at all? It's okay if the answer is no, for now.
It does resonate.
Okay,
I don't know if I do a very good job of describing how at this point,
okay.
or in what ways.
Can anybody of the four, or the 3.5, because Emily's not here yet, explain this thing about whether or not there's an in-between, why having an in-between or not having an in-between is critical to one's art practice? I'm really glad I'm asking these really challenging questions. Should have.
Well, the in-between is surely to do with the uncertainty. If you didn't have the in-between, it would be reproduction. You would be working towards a point that you know already.
You sure?
If you didn't have an in-between.
Sorry?
If you said if you didn't have an in-between, you would have a
If I
reproduction.
didn't have that.
Or if you did.
What did I, if I,
You said if I didn't have an uncertainty, you'd be working into like a rationalistic paradigm. So I heard you.
yeah, that's what,
That was good. What's the problem with having a deep cut or not having, what is this problem? We have to locate the problem so that we know to either abandon it or not deal with it or whatever. Alberto? What is this deep cut problem?
It's an ontological problem, I think.
And what does the word ontological mean?
It means that the ground of the system, according to the deep cut version,
Yeah.
starts from the pre-existence of substances, or pre-existence of stuff. So you start with identity.
Or you start with two sides.
With two sides.
Even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you start that you already had something solid, and then it's all a matter of placing these solids, building up stuff out of these solids as if it was like Lego blocks or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all spatial, and if you have a project, you do have steps, but those steps are all about moving stuff around. So Derrida would say that you actually are not really dealing with time, but always with presence. It's always spatiality, it's always space. It's not really a system of becoming. Whereas in the non-deep cut version, you don't start with the solids, and the solids are never really totally solid either. They're always in a state of reconfiguration, and there's no real ground, in the sense that because you don't have the solids, you actually don't need a surface where to put the solids and the rest of them. It's a matter of intensity, of energy, that allows for this network of things that don't really exist in a solid way to form and to have relation between them and to become more solid or decrease in solidity in a way, and it's a continuous process that allows for complexity to arise and decrease and things to happen, and so to go back to your question, to apply these two ontologies to being an artist or being a researcher. One ontology is about producing stuff, so it's always about projecting. You project, you want to achieve something, and you try to find ways to get to that point. So you tend not to be a researcher, you tend to be an executor with lots of imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the other case, everything is on the table for game to play, and yourself as well. So you're a researcher. You might have research questions, but eventually, if it's research, then research questions. So it's all continuously going on, and you'll never really get to any final stage. I mean, you do get to stages in which you say, okay, now this is important. I want to frame this.
But if mathematics makes sense, literally produces sense. That's what we started with. Then you get to something. Something has a sense.
Yeah.
Something has meaning.
But that sense is always a sense in relation to the bigger pictures, and those pictures can also contradict each other. So what makes sense in mathematics makes sense always within a frame, and it doesn't make sense in any absolutistic way, in any absolute. So it's always relational. So in that sense, mathematics is it's never totally transcendental, because it does have a relation of trying to translate, but is also in itself entangled with the situation. I guess it's not really like there's no fixed hierarchy.
Maybe we should open a window, or maybe I'm just the only one dying because it's cold and hot. Okay. That's, for anybody on the couch, did that clarify? No, not at all. Yes. A little bit. Yes. Okay.
There's a paragraph At the beginning of chapter 3, which summarizes what Alberto said, and it works well with the problem of mathematics.
What page?
The first page of chapter 3,
What is it?
97.
97. Was this what you're supposed to be doing?
No.
No.
I'm serious than what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yes, I see that you all had mental telepathy moments with Sarah. Okay, go on.
Should I read it?
Yes, please.
So the title of the chapter is Niels Bohr, Philosophy, Physics, Quantum Physics and the Nature of Knowledge and Reality.
Wait, start again, sorry.
Niels Bohr's Philosophy, Physics, Quantum Physics and the Nature of Knowledge and Reality.
That's the title.
Representationalism and Newtonian physics have root in the 17th century. The assumption that language is a transparent medium that transmits a homologous picture of reality to the knowing mind finds its parallel in a scientific theory that takes observation to be the benign facilitator of discovery, a transparent lens passively gazing at the world. Just as words provide descriptions or representation of a pre-existing reality, observation reveals pre-existing properties of an observation-independent reality. In the 20th century, both the representational or mimetic status of language and the inconsequentiality of the observational process have been called into question. I find that this issue of transparent language has to do with the mathematics. And I also find
How do you mean that?
well, because there is
You're right, but how do you mean
mathematics. It's very. When we mentioned elegance earlier, I thought of this paragraph because elegance is not the same as Stuart said, a statement of truth. One cannot quantify elegance. So there is a functioning in the concept of elegance, a making of sense that allows a circulation and an holding together. That is not the same as a statement that says this table is blue and is verifiable against sort of background board that holds all answers. And mathematics is at times presented, in the philosophical discourse at least, ambiguously as the language of truth. I'm thinking particularly of Barad, who go as far as saying that what can be said in mathematics is what is possible ontologically.
So a simple version is 2 + 2 is 4.
Mm-hmm.
That's the truth. It's not 211 and will always be 4 if you're in base 10. So, and your remark about that is saying that very, let's say, early assumption, and we're talking about arithmetic here, is rolled out amongst many aspects of mathematics to be the full statement of what there is.
Well, there is yes.
That is to say, the truth.
Because then there is a problem of mathematics for mathematicians and mathematics for physicists, as it happens here. And then mathematics for physicists or for other scientists becomes a way to represent the world. So the issue of a transparent language becomes much more important to address.
Mm-hmm.
Because, yes, it is true one can represent mathematically what happens, but mathematics makes sense. I mean, it is not a neutral lens. It is a filter with a lot of bias attached to it, or it's creating filters. Is why I find it really interesting.
And is the bias that's attached to it, would you say that bias is sensuous bias? Is it tactile? Is it
Yes, it creates reality, it creates world. It does, it matters, it makes matter.
And so if you say it makes matter, does that mean that the matter is sensuous ipso facto?
Yes, but sensuous not in of the five senses, in a different way.
Which way is that? In the seventh way.
In a broader sense of the five senses, because it has a presence, it matters, it makes sense, and
Like it's understandable and communicative.
No, also because you talk analysis, it's a distribution of concepts and materials and tangible objects. It distributes the world, and at the same time, it is sensuous because it is not the abstract image of mathematics we have absorbed in standard education.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it makes sense precisely because on the one hand you had the ontology, and on the other hand you had this other thing that can be called mattering, and the being sensuous, it is another way of saying mattering. It's like if I try to make an example, let's say that a visual example. Let's say if you go to Renaissance painting, the stereotypical image of the Florentine school, it's the drawing, and you have things are first of all drawn and then colors applied, and so that is like following this ontology, the ontology. Whereas let's say that in Venice or in the Flanders, for some reasons they were not following this. They were not drawing before applying color, but they were shaping things directly with color, and they were not bothered to think how things would look like when they were not seen, and they were allowing themselves to put stuff floating around in the surface of the painting without really bothering what was happening beneath. And that is because they were following a sensuous paradigm. They were not concerned at all with okay, but what's the exact perspective of the space if this would be like a tableau vivant? They were not bothered. So what I would suggest is try to imagine that this applies to vision, but like if we try to apply this way of doing to all the senses together and everything beyond the limits of the senses, just thinking that you could have something that in which the relation mattered and not the pre-existing objects, so no pre-existing hidden parts of body, pre-existing anything. It's just a matter of relation, what actually sticks together.
So the next step is, of course, don't answer this yet, it's just a rhetorical question, but what makes something stick together becomes part of this, let's say, detective thing we're doing right now. We're doing on a detective moment. Okay, let's circle back to Ajumba. I'm going to bring you into the conversation.
Yeah.
What is the conversation you want to be brought into?
When we spoke yesterday,
oh, so you really did speak?
Yeah, we did speak.
Oh, that's hilarious.
You did speak. It was around how Barad offers a way to think about research, and then there's various sections that like I'm pulled out, and that speaks to kind of the research process. But I'm also kind of research as practice, and as basically how it kind of kind of really is kind of a mesh of different things kind of coming.
And can you pull out where she says that?
So and there's two sections, and there's page 25 in the first section. To write matter a meaning.
Where on page 25?
The second paragraph. To write matter a meaning in two separate categories, to analyze them relative to separate discrete technologies.
Sorry, I don't know if anybody else hasn't found it, but I haven't found it yet.
It's the first paragraph.
It's the first paragraph.
It's the third paragraph.
No,
First paragraph.
it's in the middle of the
Fourth
first
line.
paragraph.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, to
To
write
write
matter.
matter,
Okay,
yeah.
got it. Okay,
Yeah.
ready.
Yeah.
Okay, go.
To write matter and meaning in two separate categories, to analyze them relative to separate discrete technologies, and to divide complex phenomena into one balkanized enclave. I'm not quite sure what the word balkanized means.
We'll get back to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Or the other is to ellipse certain crucial aspects by design. On the other hand, considering them together does not mean forcing them together, collapsing important differences between them or treating them in the same way. Rather, it means allowing any integral aspect to emerge by not writing them out. Before we get started, that's kind of one section.
So just, what does balkanization mean?
Is it hardening?
What?
Hardening.
It means hardening, but it's usually referred to politically.
Yeah,
The
so
Balkan
it's a
states.
geopolitical. It's like a melting pot, isn't it, of cultures, identities, and
But just the
but
opposite.
it's putting a very stiff, rigid sort of, group of borders.
It's a stiffening of
Yeah.
a melting pot.
It's different.
No, but that's what I'm saying. It's that area is a melting pot, but geopolitically it's become very rigid.
It's
Sort of
like
imposing a-
fragmented, like the
yeah,
Flag of War.
fragmented.
Yeah.
Well, another way of looking at this is like it's the quintessential racist response to difference. Put a ring around it.
And build a
balkanize it,
wall.
Build a wall.
Yeah.
And so you're right, the so-called melting pot, all the different types of cultures, people, whatever, is contained.
Yeah,
That's what it
and
means
you
to
suddenly
be
get-
balkanized.
You don't belong here now. You've got to go
You
there.
gotta go there. Yeah,
So that's the deep cut basically.
it's a deep cut. And so she's saying here in this example that the deep cut brings on a balkanization of research, basically. That's very good. Yeah, what was the other page?
And then we highlighted on page 45, first section and the last line.
So that's chapter 1.
Yeah, and the first one is crucial to this theoretical framework is a strong commitment to accounting for the material nature of
Sorry.
practices.
Sorry, I'm really very slow here. You're on page 45.
Yeah,
Again, right before the subheading.
yeah.
Oh yeah, crucial.
Yes, a crucial to this theoretical framework is a strong commitment to accounting for the material nature of practices, and how they come to matter.
So what do you make of that sentence?
I think kind of I'm what I'm actually trying to kind of get at is there is kind of another way to articulate how things can work or how things can operate.
In
Yeah.
this sentence, yes, in this sentence, the word material, like for the material nature, practices and how they come to matter, so we have matter and material again, they seem to be posed differently. What's the similarity, what's the difference between material and matter here?
The material is more passive and matter is actually more active, because it produces sense, it makes sense. Well, material seems to be quite a static phenomenon, which is not matter yet.
Properties that are
Probably
already
I would say like that.
existent. Sorry.
Sorry, so Tata said not matter yet,
Mm.
and then what'd you say?
I said in this context, she means that the sort of properties that we assume that they already possess.
Mm-hmm.
But also, material stands in opposition to the transparency of languages that we read earlier.
Yes, good point.
So when you were asking earlier why is mathematics sensual, it's because mathematics is a practice in the sense that it is a set of rules and its meaning is a set of rules. You can witness that.
Yes,
It is a
the
pattern.
ghost of Wittgenstein comes through.
It is a pattern of behavior which is the sense the mathematic makes.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously this is said, it's not a tautology, but it is an immanent way.
So that's why it's onto epistemology then.
It's not keeping the two separate.
So it produces sense.
But why do you call it onto epistemology? What mileage do you get by calling it?
Because it's not what it is, but it's hard to explain. The production of sense is active, so it's like not. Matteo was talking about the mathematical rules.
Isn't that more of a method rather than epistemology? It's a processing. Was it? Yeah.
Can we use the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics to get us to the onto?
Why not?
Okay.
So, what is the Copenhagen translation of physics here?
Well, that is, broadly speaking, sort of the uncertainty principle and the complementarity principle together. Uncertainty was Heisenberg's principle, and complementarity was Bohr's. And so the difference between the two is that uncertainty says that we can't know, going back to the position and momentum thing, we can't know the position of a particle if we also know its momentum, and vice versa. But complementarity, and indeed Bohr's sort of philosophical approach to it, says that not only can we not know these things, but they're not actually determinate, which means that by looking at them, we actually create them.
Yes. So that even if we did know them, that knowing is a false knowing in a certain sense.
It is a false knowing.
It's what's it called, false friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it makes it appear as though they mean something, when in fact the meaning is in the actual engagement.
Which makes me think of Marshall McLuhan.
Okay. Right, let's not bring in
let's not
Marshall
go
at the
there.
moment. I'm sure he's quite relevant, but let's just put him off to the side so we...
But that's
so
what I was thinking. That's sort of the onto-epistemological thing for me, because the epistemological bit is the knowing, or the not knowing,
The
false knowing.
systematizing of the knowing.
Yeah, and then the onto bit is the fact that is the influence that the apparatus, not necessarily the observer, but the apparatus that is making the measurement itself, then has the effect on
Producing knowledge.
the particle. So that's it's generative.
So, but in producing the knowledge becomes what it is.
Yeah.
It becomes, the knowledge itself becomes ontological
Yes.
because of the material, and because it's repeatable, you can produce repeat that experiment with the same material apparatus, and you can still get an ontological result which stays the same. And
Can
that's
you
ontology rather
repeat that?
than no.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, we can.
So go with Bohr's interpretation that position and momentum don't exist as independent things to discover. They're not contained inherently in an ontological object. They are made, they emerge from both the material setup and the act of measurement. But Barad terms phenomena as an expanded definition, and that in that phenomena it's repeatable using the same experimental material conditions in separate moments, and that's what grants this epistemological sort of interpretation an ontology, because it's repeatable, it has some basis which isn't just opinion.
So if it's an ontology, does that make it law?
It means
Face.
What do you mean by law?
Well, law is that which cannot be otherwise. Okay, never mind about the question of law. Let's just forget about that. Just bracket that off. I raised law because originally Andrea raised the question of identity, which has certain, quote, principles. And there are principles that are being developed here. And I was just trying to get you to articulate them, but throwing in the word law made very many wrinkled brows, so we'll get rid of law for the moment. The anarchist here. Okay, so just repeat it one more time, the Bohr issue. Heisenberg. So Heisenberg is saying what? Sarah?
Heisenberg says that we can't know position and momentum at the same time. They exist as ontological variables of an object, but we just can't measure them at the same time.
And why is that important? What was his shtick about this? I mean, obviously he's coming up with the atom bomb. And what is the thing about this position? Why is he holding to this position? What's the point of it?
Because he firmly believes, like Einstein and other scientists, that there is an ontological separability, that objects do exist in and of themselves. Hidden variable theory, that there are actual ontostatic variables which are there, but in the act of measurement we disturb the object itself, so the measurement we get back distorts our reading of what this object is, and we can only get certain variables back depending on the conditions we...
Because of our interaction with it, do you mean? Okay.
So the minute a measurement is taken, it's already
Mm.
reduced the object or taken something from it, or it's not ever the pure object in that sense.
Okay.
And then what is Bohr's annoyance with that position?
Bohr's
And please, everyone,
interpretation
remember how
is...
to spell Bohr. It's not being boring. Okay.
Is that...
Said that one of my undergrads said it as B-O-R-E. No, wrong. Okay.
It's that variables such as position and momentum aren't inherently contained in this object, but they themselves emerge from the interaction of the measurer, the measuring apparatus, the person who does the measuring, and those values, what you get from the experiment. The phenomena that emerge is in fact where the ontology actually lies.
So that's basically Stewart's thesis done, right?
There you go.
That's the line shape, I think. Just so you know.
Okay.
But, okay, let me just push you one more time on this. So, who comes up with the uncertainty principle?
Yes.
This is easy.
Heisenberg.
Heisenberg, very good. And it's uncertain because, why is it uncertain?
Because you can't know it yourself.
Right, okay, so it's this whole principle that Dane has just explained. And
Certainty itself is hidden.
Mm.
certainty itself is hidden. So the uncertainty principles, you can't know that both, because if one's moving, you can't determine the other, right? Basically, that's the short version. What you then described about Bohr is also uncertain. But his uncertainty is a very different form of uncertainty. It's the Alberto thesis uncertainty, right?
Mm.
And that uncertainty produces what?
Produces phenomena, but that phenomena is repeatable because of the material setup can be repeated. It can be, the space can be set up again and again, and it will always produce a certain degree of accuracy with regards to position and momentum, yet certain.
But this is relative anyway, because
No.
but it is relative because how can you draw a final line to the thing?
We're going to have you two drawing swords all semester. I can see this.
No. It's just that at one point Barad also asks, when do you draw the line of the apparatus?
Yeah.
That is relative. You decide where to draw the line. You cannot say that we can go back to the same exact moment in the universe to repeat the experiment if you think that the experiment apparatus goes on up until who knows. So in that sense, there's always some.
But relative doesn't mean all things that can happen. Relative means that which happens given certain variables.
It's just that the limit of the variable cannot be given once for all. You decide the apparatus finish at that point. But then it's a decision that you make, and that way you actually.
But that's Barad's agential cut,
Yeah.
where that's the different sort of cut.
That's the agential.
And that allows
Yes.
the
Good.
repeatability.
Good. Sorry.
That is where the central comes back into the question.
Yes. Good.
Because that cut makes walls and makes them already with the shape. So one passes from the idea of a wall that is outside and autonomous or absolute, of which I can know portion or
You say world.
world.
Okay, yeah, right.
Sorry, I always have to pronounce it.
That's right.
World outside, autonomous independent absolute, which ideally, between brackets, was knowable, at least in a portion. And now we are turning it around, and we are saying that the apparatus draws boundaries, not on something that pre-exists, but defines a distribution or a regime of reproduction, which then makes sense because is the world.
Couch.
Bit of heavy.
Bit of a headache, yeah. What are we doing back there? Couch. You can count as part of the couch.
But I believe that the example of the transparent language and the lens is a very good key for understanding this problem of the apparatus. I mean, we're all more or less familiar with lens-based media, as they are called, with horrid description. And we know very well that they are not a direct, absolute literal representation of what's in front of the lens. So many things play a part in it that what one has is a form of narration, or a form of repetition, or a form of distribution, all of them together plus other things. And film does not seem to be as digital, photography is not film, different angles of the lens, all these things change the final result. And that's precisely what the apparatus is here.
Can I ask a question about the apparatus? What if, does the apparatus emerge from this process? Or what if the apparatus is made during
What does
these
what does it look
insertion-
like in your mind? What is an can you draw it or build it with any of our things here? Is an apparatus like a scaffolding? Do you see it as like something around the scaffolding? What is the apparatus in your head?
Well, for me, I think they mentioned apparatus.
It's right, blame it on
that
Carol.
is used to kind of measure something, but I don't know. What if that emerges out of? So you don't know what it looks like. It kind of emerges as this is happening. So you can't use it to measure it.
What becomes part of the apparatus can drastically change. I mean, I've got here on page 144, Barad says, Bohr mistakes the apparatus for a mere laboratory setup. Barad.
If it
Well, that's what I'm wondering.
What
Does it look?
144 apparently. That's on my notes.
I was thinking about that very quickly. 144.
My notes are very well organised.
But what do you really think about your notes?
Yeah, you don't know
sorry,
what's...
where is it? On 142nd?
I have no idea.
It's the top, isn't it? Furthermore, Bohr's conception of the apparatus
Yeah.
does not
Yeah.
Can you read that out loud there?
No, but sorry, it goes on the second paragraph. Is that very sentence that Dane said, which is in short, Bohr mistakes the apparatus for a mere laboratory setup. Sorry.
So, Sophie,
Okay.
can you read that?
What, the top from the top?
Just in short.
In short,
Oh, well, actually, maybe from the top, yeah, because that's actually even better.
furthermore, Bohr's conception of the apparatus does not accurately take account of the complexities of experimental practice, despite his apparent intentions to do just that. Quite atypical of the writings of theoretical physicists, Bohr's papers include detailed drawings of measuring instruments. His attentiveness to the details of the apparatus makes perfect sense, given his insistence that the concepts used to describe phenomena are not ideations but specific material arrangements. For Bohr, word and world are tied to each other. Nonetheless, Bohr treats the apparatus itself as an ideal measuring device that springs full-blown from the head of Zeus, operates itself, or at most requires the pushing of a few buttons to produce results, requires no tinkering, no maintenance, no muss, no fuss. Its constitutionality remains constant. No rearrangements, no alterations, no adjustments. It is frozen at a moment in time, denied its historicity and mutability. In an important sense, then, Bohr's apparatus is hermetically sealed off from any and all outside influences. The scientist is a liberal humanist subject who is merely there to choose an appropriate apparatus for the investigation and note the results. once the apparatus is in place, the scientist stands back and watches what happens.
The scientist is part of the apparatus, surely.
Yeah, but that's what she's saying. So she's
Yeah.
criticizing Bohr's position.
I picture the apparatus to be the background, meaning that it's always the background. If you look at the background, that becomes your phenomenon, and that will have another background. So I think it's something that it is part of the picture, so you can describe it, but it's not the center of the picture.
But is background, like if we look at this picture here, what's the background in that picture?
It depends where. Well, in this case, because it's a
Flat surface.
it's a flat surface. It's a bit tricky, but it probably, let's say that you look at it and the background you perceive to be like the represented wall. Then if you start getting really interested with the shadows on the wall, which might be the focal thing why you actually are starting liking it, then the background of that might become the materiality of some folds around there, and then if you look at those folds, maybe the background becomes what was in the foreground. The background is always what is, not necessarily what is in the back, but it's what.
That's what I wanted you to clarify, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is not on the focus?
So could you say atmosphere was the background?
No.
Okay.
Well, in a way, yes, but not necessarily. Like I would say that the background is just wherever it is affecting the picture, but it's not the center of it.
So so is that the apparatus that you're saying the
I
background?
think my understanding of it is that the apparatus is sort of a horizon of the phenomenon, a background, and so it has I would say a negative nature. It is let's say you look somewhere and you're gonna have a focal point. Everything that is around and the sense of yourself is the apparatus. And then when you start mining your skull, maybe the apparatus will not be.
Wait, you start doing what you used?
If, let's say you're minding your skull, you're thinking about your skull.
Oh, I see, right. Okay.
I don't know, maybe the apparatus is going to be in front of you because you are just focusing on I don't know. It's just everywhere that is not.
Let's just forget about that example. Please don't take that in.
Okay, I just meant that it's just whatever is part of the picture without being the center of the picture, and the picture don't mean necessarily.
Well, so Roland Barthes says the punctum is the thing that makes the picture happen, but you don't mean this as a punctum.
No, and then in his no, because in his case, he also tries to say that the punctum is what makes the artwork in a way. Like he's talking in like there's another degree.
But it does sound like the apparatus says it as well in your argument. Makes the artwork work.
No, I would say that the apparatus is the side and all the time. It doesn't make it just.
That would give it too much of an Heideggerian element to it, which is not there, but I believe the apparatus. I believe, in my understanding, obviously, as you say, apparatus is not structure, but it is also. If it is the horizon, which is a good way of putting it, it is a organized horizon which varies depending on the situations and is creative. It generates the reality of which it is the horizon. So in this sense, it is always at the margin of the picture.
But actually, I see that as going in the two directions. Like I really don't think in terms of the apparatus makes the phenomena. I think the phenomena makes the apparatus and vice versa in a way that is absolutely not detachable. It just doesn't make sense to me to think in terms of one making the other.
That's cool.
Yeah,
Wait, Tadas has been.
I'm not sure, like I've lost the thread because like I wanted to jump in because like I found a nice phrase and nice sentence in this book. It seems that it's related, but it just seems that in a way you're talking complementarity now, also the principle, because we can know one or the other. So it's just on which you focus, something comes to foreground, but something falls to background, and if you start to focus on the background, then, like the foreground starts to fall into, it's just constant loop. So what Barad writes, and I think she took that from the play, page 21, I can't remember exactly which place it is because I'm reading it from my notes. And what it says, if you're doing something, you have to concentrate on what you, if you're doing something, you have to concentrate on. You can't also be thinking of doing it. And if you're thinking about doing it, then you can't actually be doing it. So that's the play of apparatus, background, foreground, the constant shift.
Can anyone find that sentence in here?
To the top of page 21.
Margaret.
Oh, Margaret.
Yeah, it's from the play, I think.
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah. Right. Can you read it out loud, Stuart, or something?
I've typed it out often enough. If you're doing something you have to concentrate on, you can't also be thinking about doing it. And if you're thinking about doing it, then you can't actually be doing it. Yes?
And do you agree with that?
He says reading and not understanding who's reading.
That's right, he says exactly. Okay, that sort of proves
Yeah,
that.
because she goes on to say that then Heisenberg doesn't know why he went to Copenhagen, and I think that's a very
iffy.
Yeah, very iffy.
Yeah.
Together, because I'm sure he was very clear why he went.
I mean, it's much more easier to invent history than it is to invent the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a slightly different take on apparatus.
Okay, good. It's not Althusser, is it?
No, it's Kant.
Okay, good.
The body is the
Wait,
apparatus.
she starts from Kant.
I do.
Oh, you do, okay.
So the body is the apparatus. We have the inner senses, outer senses. This is the apparatus. Then we have extended apparatus, which is telescopes or microscopes, this kind of thing, extended apparatus. But then the community is part of that extended apparatus. So phenomenal apparatus is the community, the scientific community in that case, which is the extended apparatus. And that's the conference. It also brings in Sarah's Marshall Curve when you have that sense of that apparatus and enables us to become. And not all of the apparatus actually speaks. Some of the apparatus doesn't speak in this sense of body and community and the phenomenal tools of the extended apparatus. There's only parts of it that speak, and quite a lot of it because of the senses of the apparatus of the body. Not all of the parts speak. It's very silent. So the body is very silent, and not all the senses are engaged in this apparatus. Not all the senses are engaged. At one time, it's not a totality in that sense. Different parts of the apparatus, the community, or the product.
What do you mean by silent?
Simply that, because it's within the community, the scientific community, only parts of it will speak at any one time about parts of what he's talking about. The rest remains silent, because otherwise it would be a continuous sound and noise, which is not speaking. A sound and noise is a representation of what you're describing within the apparatus. He's not speaking within the community. That's a visual thing or an oral thing, which are different kind of sciences of discursive practice that creates within the apparatus. It's not a totality. Those who say one senses are not part of that into a totality. There's different parts within the apparatus, and one part of the apparatus is it has an intensity type. Which one? The other parts of the apparatus are not necessarily engaged. So when you're observing, say, observing the Heisenberg or the complementary within the apparatus, observation is not the speaking within the community, it's still part of the apparatus. The speaking out is
I'm sorry, this is really flaring my synesthesia. When you say silence, I hear motion.
You hear motion.
Yeah, I know, it's really odd.
But wait, I'm going to just cut in here for a second. So the apparatus you're talking about is basically a Kantian position.
I just started with the body.
Okay, but in what way?
Because that is.
Can you draw? I see that. But can you draw that to Barad?
Yes, because that's what she says. That's why I said this. She's saying. She's saying we start with the apparatus, which is the sense we have in our sense, our experience. The extended apparatus allows us to go beyond what we can experience through our basic senses. So the technical tools of the quantum mechanical world are the Marshall McLuhan's extended apparatus that we, in the same way that a car is extended apparatus, that we can sense the edge of the car. stuff. It kind of enables us to extend the same way weapons or something. It makes us a weaponized person. You know the argument with Marshall. So it weaponizes us in that way. So the extended apparatus of the quantum world, which is also the apparatus, is also the community, because it's not the individual that speaks within the apparatus. The scientific community speaks. It's a phenomenal world, which is an apparatus, which is a community. So there's always a look towards the worlds that the identities and the community that she identifies and says that she belongs to. So it's like an Emily painting of a cocktail party, Karen Barad's cocktail party. She's invited feminist groups, and then there's the gay community and the scientific community, and there's Ian Hacking over there, and Bohr's turned up.
You see, that's not what she's saying. I would say that I would think that would be precisely what she's not saying. She's saying a part of what you're saying, in the sense that there are bleeds into different ways of understanding edges and coalitions, as it were.
Yeah.
But there wouldn't be something like these ingredients, whether or not we call them the gay, the feminist, whatever the story is, or the cocktail. They're not the ingredients that come in, because the ingredients themselves.
That's who she's talking to.
No, but
she's talking out. That's the community that she's identifying with. This her work identifies and in the names that she recalls on and stuff. They are part of the apparatus. Everyone thing that gets mentioned and those that do not get mentioned in the history of science, all those other paths and stuff, they are also part of the apparatus in the history of science.
I'm just warning. I'm just throwing out a warning, which is be careful. You're not wrong on this one aspect, but what is the problem is that it's not as fully formed. These groups, the groups themselves are indices of apparatusi.
Yeah,
in that sense, they don't actually start from something and then sort of make their way out, like the body, the edges. So in that sense, it's not Kantian. It's that it's kind of the reverse move, and the reverse move creates the apparatus. But the apparatus is not a homogeneous apparatus, and so in that sense, the heterogeneity of the thing, whether or not you're talking about the history of science or whatever the different elements are that come in, they're not fused elements. That's what I was hearing. Now maybe you're not saying that, but I was
really.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, trying to sort of connect it up a bit. It's coming back to me, and my memory's awful. But is it in here where the guy with the cigar smoke on his breath? Is it this book? Yeah. So that's where for me that connects up. That's a factor. You could think the scientists what they had for breakfast could have a relevance, could be part of the apparatus, but it's as you say, it's the way round that it's going. There's something to do with attunement or awareness.
I think that
raises that gives that ability to identify that has become a part, an active part, maybe a non-silent part of the apparatus.
I think she goes on to talk about Haraway's having no boundaries, and the cyber body's been really important on page 41. She talks about Haraway emphasises instability. It is the instability of boundaries defining objects that is the focal point of her explicit challenge. Not only
Sorry. I'm incapable of finding these.
It's right down the bottom.
Oh yeah.
Site.
So 4 lines up.
Yeah.
5 lines up. Yeah. Can you read that again?
In contrast, Haraway, 1988, emphasises instability. It is the instability of boundaries defining objects that is the focal point of her explicit challenge, not only to conceptions of nature that claim to be outside of culture, but also to the separation of epistemology from ontology. And then she goes up.
And so what does that mean? Why is that important? That's a very good thing to pick out.
Because I think it's sort of what Mark was saying, that there are no edges to the apparatus. It's not like there is an edge that you can see. There are no boundaries.
That's right. Well, that's why I might have misheard you, but that's when you're saying the different groups. I just want to make sure that the groups don't have edges.
But I think the fact that it is Haraway is important. It is Haraway that she draws on.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was.
And why is that important?
I think it's, well, I might say important.
You're right, but just to
Yeah. Well, one.
what a reason, not
A reason. We can't get around the fact that we're dealing with. It's not really relevant to the story that we're telling here, but we're still dealing with units. This is still stuff that has to be important. As Adorno said, I still have to make my it doesn't quite say like this, but he says I still have to exist in the marketplace. There's still a commodity fascism here. We can't stop not dealing with in units. There's still what's it say today, Homo economicus. We're still the economical man, So she talks about Haeckel, for instance, who is a philosopher from another time. I want to bring in Emily's painting, but he himself exists within a framework of a different conversation and a different economical relation at the same time.
But she is challenging this notion of the unit.
Yes, but at the same time, that is also the world of we have to put kind of bread on the table. It's still that there still have to be the novelty, the understanding. It's not just if it was just about understanding in some way, then you could call on. I'm sure she's got a. I really don't want to say this.
No,
it's not. She's got an editor. Who said, "Look, no, don't want that. Cut that. Cut that."
No. I think that
I think
maybe she did or maybe she didn't.
I don't want to say that. But
no,
that's
what I'm trying to push you on here.
Reality of production.
No, I don't. Respectfully, I have to say that I think that it's about what she's doing here is looking at this question of the unit. Yes, we can't pretend we're not in a capitalist society, let's say. We're in a capitalist society, so deal. I mean, there's that's part of the argument you're saying. But what she's also saying is, if you divide it like that, if you say, on the one side we're just trying to understand what's going on, and the other side we have to deal with the reality, that's still this division that she's trying to avoid. And so the apparatus that she's trying to focus is to take away from that, reality, contemplation, division. And so to me, the reason I think this is a very good point that she's picked out here, that Sophie's picked out here, what it does is it gets into the fact of if you start dividing off, like there's only two types of people in the world, the ones that divide and the ones that don't. I mean, that kind of argument, then you're going to end up engaging in the exact same problem you're trying to get out of. And I don't think she's trying to get out of it just, let's say, philosophically, although she is obviously trying to do that. She's trying to suggest a practical entity, in this case the apparatus, that enables a non-division to create the accessibility of the units, let's say. Something like that. I don't know if that... Did we lose, most of the group here? Are people still with us?
She does talk about the units bit on page 24, which is the third paragraph. It says, I also do not assume that a meaningful answer to the questions about the relationship between science and ethics can be derived from what physics alone tells about the world. Physics can't be bootstrapped into giving a full account of the social world. It would be wrong to simply assume that people are the analogues of atoms and that societies are mere epiphenomena that can be explained in terms of collective behaviour of massive ensembles of individual entities, like little atoms each, or that sociology is reducible to biology, which is reducible to chemistry, which is in turn reducible to physics. Quantum physics undercuts reductionism as a worldview or universal explanatory framework. Reductionism has a very limited run.
Very good. Yes.
On this problem of apparatus, I believe it is important to point out, it was mentioned but not as statement itself, that apparatus is not material, it's not a structure. The division, for example, in nature and society is in itself an apparatus or part of the apparatus, and conditions how one designs experiments, instruments, and vice versa. Then those instruments produce results which contribute to shape further non-tangible distributions. So in this sense, there is a continuity in shaping what we read earlier about the critique of Bohr, who presented the apparatus as something static. But there is an element as well of the fact that it is what later on she would call the discursive and the material, acting always together.
This is really revolutionary, isn't it? I mean, it's particularly in the view of experimental science, which has to be very rigorously defined. So to say that
but this
you
is
can't
why
define those boundaries in
on
that
the
way.
page we were on before, now we went to page 24, where were we? On
41 was the Caraway
41,
quote.
just higher up, halfway through the paragraph. Barad is writing about ontology, and then there is Hacking Cartwright, and then she writes, shifting the focus in studies of science away from the traditional emphasis on theory construction to the examination of experimental practice. Hacking grounds his position on the ability of the experimenter to manipulate entities in the laboratory. And then the sentence that I think is important. That which exists is that which we can use to intervene in the world to affect something else. Electrons are counted as real because they are effective experimental tools, not because they've been found. So what happens, what she starts referring to here is this idea of mattering. If I do X, what comes out of it? What are the consequences? Is an ontology turned forward to indeed the consequences, what will happen, rather than what is the ground of things? So the ephemerality, to me, or the non-tangibility of a distribution becomes material because it organizes the world one way or another.
I think ontology turned forward is a very useful way of engaging with this.
So we're talking about being but becoming.
Yes, yes. But that is the being, as it were, is the becoming.
Yeah, which is true.
But I mean, I'm thinking of something which, this may be a terrible example. Don't do it. I have to do it. But it probably is a terrible example. When I was in Venice, which I have a real serious love-hate relationship to, but luckily I was in Venice not during the Biennale in its swing, so you could actually walk in Venice. What was remarkable on one level, which is remarkable, I think a lot of people must think this, is just the bizarre corners that people could find, the way they were shaped. There's no, let's say, logic, mathematical logic or otherwise, that something would be shaped in the way it was shaped, or that indeed you'd have an entire city on water, et cetera, et cetera. You know, but it was, the whole time I kept thinking, the mind that one had, or the minds that one had to architecturally create this environment as though it made sense, as though this wasn't a fantasy, that they weren't trying to do a folly like what's his name in Spain? I can remember his name now. Gaudi. They weren't trying to do Gaudi. This was the energy that created these very peculiar curves and these very weird shaped buildings, from my mind now. Or in Tokyo, for those of you who've been in Tokyo, to walk in the center of Tokyo is to basically be the intersection between Shintoism, different forms of Buddhism, and Cartesianism all at once, and it's completely weird. You suddenly in like a different dimension. To have that energy rethink the mathematics comes in, or rethink the tools that you're using, whatever. That's the apparatus. The apparatus creates the logic that makes it make sense that this is exactly how it looks. And I don't mean the psychological, like, you know, what were people really thinking back then, or what are they for, but that there is just this moment that is seized whenever it's seized. In this case it was seized, and I was walking in Venice at the moment, but you don't have to go to Venice, you go to right outside to take a look. What is it that creates that decision, and it's not just money to make a building look this way versus that way, or your own artwork. What is it that makes it look like that? That's your apparatus, which is not the method as such. And that's what she was trying to get at, I think. So,
Yeah, it's
is that
not
a
the
terrible
camera,
example?
it's what you do with it. It's how you...
But it's not just
use
how
it.
what you do with it. It's that what you do with it. If it's not going to be folly, and you're not doing it for a folly, you know, or even if you are doing it for a folly, then you have to understand what it is to do the folly, right? So that you know it's a folly. What is it that makes that make sense?
But isn't that in some ways going back to what Alberto was saying earlier about the fact that you might have questions in your PhD, but you don't find the answers? You sort of find the answers, but what you're really finding is an answer at sort of one point, but then an extended collection of questions that you're sort of moving
Yes.
forward with, and that the city sort of builds like that. There's questions that are sort of answered, but in the finding of those, then there's more things that need to be done, or developments, or things that constantly are moving forward.
Well, I would
It's
say
not
it
a
slightly
static
differently,
thing.
but this again might be incorrect. I would think that it's not about a question. You're not having a question. It's that it makes so much sense that it's not questioned in that sense. That's just part of the thing.
But
No.
there's a striking anyway, because
There's a what?
There's a striking. There's a moment that someone is stroking somehow.
Yeah.
You were
Yeah,
let's say
yeah,
you were
yeah.
in Venice. Okay.
Yeah.
So the apparatus is now Venice, or what they had in their
Whatever,
mind.
yeah.
It's what that phenomenon
Yes.
is. You
Yes,
being
yes, of course.
American and everything being in Venice, and so.
An American in Venice.
No,
yeah.
I'm just saying that it's your background that is also working actively to create the
Absolutely.
picture.
Absolutely.
So that's why the apparatus.
Isn't contained in one entity.
That's why I think it's a very tricky tricky notion, because it goes both directions, and it cannot be fully drawn, limited, because there's a bit of the apparatus that is the one you are kind of aware of, but there's also the other bit that you will never be aware of systematically,
Yeah, of course.
because it roots into what is for you the banal, the natural, the sort of white noise thing that it doesn't speak to you, but is also building up
But it
the
also,
possibilities
but
for
also,
things to appear.
just to keep with the city analogy, Venice looks nothing like Birmingham, and Birmingham looks nothing like
So
Venice.
Apparatus needs, like, for it to be apparatus, needs a degree of consistency, would you say?
Yeah, degree of
That's-
common sense, as it were. The commonality of the sense is what I'm trying to say. And so there's something, not, whether or not I'm the American in Birmingham or Venice or wherever it is, there's something that makes this place look the way it does, and it's not just, well, it is.
No, creates the place. Because
Creates
it's
the
not,
place,
it's
exactly,
Not, it's not that
exactly.
it makes it look, it creates it, and the creation comes from the gap, and the multidimensional gaps.
Which is irrespective of whether or not I, Johnny, sees it one way. I feel like we're repeating if the tree falls in the forest, but it doesn't matter how I see it. It is what it is. But what it is has this heterogeneic apparatus that has created the commonality of its sense.
It's
Or bad town planning. Thank you very much, Sarah. She's come back from her synesthesia moment. That's good. Well done.
Yeah, Alberto mentioned painting.
He mentioned pain.
No, mentioned
I missed that.
painting
Oh,
earlier.
oh, I see. So, yes,
And I think it's very interesting to observe the tool of perspective in painting as exactly the problem we are addressing. Perspective was an invention, was not finding the true way for representing reality. And it is the expression of an entire world view that depicts the world, depicts space geometrically, exactly as you were saying, distinguishing the Florentine painting from the Venetian and Anderson.
Fleming.
And therefore organizes the world according to that machine, using Dürer concept or apparatus, so that the world is presented as always already captured inside that structure, but the apparatus is not a structure precisely because it is not one for everything, but it has this reciprocity in play. And Barad takes it from Foucault, she mentions it here, particularly Discipline and Punish, where Foucault speaks of the subject as something that is always in the process of being made, and in the modern society, the way in which the subject is made is discipline. In another situation would be something else. So this capturing is what the apparatus plays, and it is creative or capturing. Creative sounds always positive, capturing always sounds negative, but what happens here is that apparatus is the set of dimensions that produces a shape, an organization of the world, the spectrum of light we have.
Can we go back to the analogy of the city, because I'm quite fascinated by this discourse that's going on with Thomas Heatherwick's bridge, because he's designed this garden bridge, which I think is just based on New York. I think he's just nicked the idea.
We're just going to have this American thing going on right now.
But it's causing such a controversy. When I went down to the South Bank, someone had stuck little protest notes on every single tree going along, saying these trees are going to be cut down for the bridge and stop the bridge. And I love the idea of the bridge. I think it'll just make that that place so interesting to look at. It will just completely change the South Bank completely.
So can you explain how?
I think his is the cut. I think he's making a cut, and some people are really objecting to the cut because they don't see the whole overview of the thing.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many people know this controversy that's going on, but it's whether or not there should be a garden bridge or a bridge like the High Line Bridge in New York, where you can, but it's not quite like the High Line.
It's not
Bridge.
quite like the High Line, no.
But
But the High Line
is
is
private, because one needs to pay for it.
it's costing a lot of money. Yeah, it's costing more than he.
It's not a derelict railway that et cetera, et cetera. So there are some.
They're not reusing anything.
There is in Southeast London. They are doing the High Line by using derelict train environments, but okay.
Yeah, I don't know. It's very fascinating. I think.
Well, let's. I mean, I realize that I've now missed my conference call, so that's.
Oh, no.
But I got into the conversation. What can you do? It's your fault, I feel. No, just kidding. It's a good fault. No, it's a good fault. It's a good fault. No. But I'm just what I'm curious about is, can anybody summarize two things? Can anybody summarize where we've gone from the beginning to now in this seminar today, and then connect it to your work? Like, I want to know, okay, we've ended up on apparatus, so everybody's like remembering about this. We talked about cut, we talked about Bohr and, uncertainty principle versus different types of uncertainty and so on and so forth. What resonates with your work? Of the people presenting.
It's the different types of uncertainty, complementarity, things like that. The way that has sort of a creative impact resonates with me, and
you said the complementarity.
Yes.
So what is that?
Complementarity is what see, now I think I have the interpretation wrong. My understanding of it was that it was sort of Bohr's sort of postscript to the uncertainty principle about the not things not being determinate, so not actually able to be determined, which means in essence they don't really sort of exist until you look at them. And so looking at them then creates them.
It blurs the line between invention and discovery.
Yeah.
So this is the same problem with fractals, that the idea that where you choose to sort of focus to, quote, zoom in, it changes the nature of the fractal itself. It's not there to discover, but it's in the calculating, it's in the computing, the doing, which makes, which changes the fractals dimension, it changes how it unfolds, and that then go to chaos free with it. How you, it's not just a matter of collecting information, how you collect information changes the information itself. And that blurring of invention discovery is
Which is pretty much what your thesis is about, because in terms of, well, not now, but part of it, in terms of thinking about the archive and how one collects, the collection itself names what is produced, it, creates the memory. And so it's a very strategic position. And then, of course, you get into the Foucauldian move of the subjected, what's it called? The subjugated identities or something like that, subjugated knowledges, Yeah, Andrea? You gonna say something? No.
Subjugated knowledges? What would that be?
Subjugated, where is that? Where is that in Foucault?
Oh, no. What's it called?
Courage of Truth?
Is it Courage of Truth? Yeah, maybe it is
No.
Courage of Truth. No. Maybe it's
It was
Society,
one of the lectures.
is it Society Must Be
Yeah,
Defended?
that's the one.
Yeah, Society Must Be Defended.
It's when knowledge becomes sort of buried in that society has no longer use for a certain knowledge, and so it sort of gets buried in a sense under the ground. It becomes underground knowledge, which can be resurfaced.
So is that what Courage of Truth is an example of that? See, in the Courage of Truth, he wants to talk about sort of the classical knowledge, classical understanding of prophecy, wisdom, techno, and appreciation, as against a scientific understanding of desire, kind of modern understanding of desire. He brings these ancient knowledges to the table rather than talk about the language of desire, just goes to practice in that modern sense. That's how I understand one of what he says. Bringing back the notions within the Courage of Truth, which are these ancient notions of prophet, the sage, and the teacher, and the Grecian, as this kind of very knowledge, rather than the modern discursive desire.
Which is what strikes me about your thesis, is playing with what Mark is saying there.
Yeah, I think that's making me think of something I read recently. I mean, that sort of idea of bringing back, actually, that's sort of using chronological time, isn't it? Where it's the idea that these knowledges are there. They're there for us to use now, if you want to use that sort of phrasing. But there's maybe a sort of chronological reading of that, saying that's, old is, forget it, but actually they're still there. They're still, but they're just maybe more buried than others.
And she says there's no linear either.
Yeah. But what makes something like, for example, sorry to bring in the debate, but one of the things I find fascinating about it, in a not necessarily good way of being fascinated, is the degree to which one candidate, namely Trump, can just present a post-fact scenario. It can be racist, sexist, whatever the thing is, whatever it happens to be at that moment, and that is just wiped away. Whereas, in this case, Hillary Clinton, who I think is much closer to Theresa May than let's say Jeremy Corbyn, but anyway, at the moment she looks like Karl Marx, so that she can say something and it simply doesn't stick in the way that what sticks in Trump is that he's a leader, he can take over the free world or whatever the story is, and Clinton can't. Now there's all these arguments, well, as a woman, this and that, but there's something else going on which I think addresses what you're talking about in terms of this minefield of things that get buried, don't get buried, that get stuck together, and create these discourses around which.
Yeah, why don't people trust her? That's the thing.
But
why doesn't she?
Or why do they trust Trump? I mean,
isn't it also about what different people want? Because some people want this notion of, I don't know, some sort of leader in a sort of a slightly messianic manner that is Trump, and so they will believe anything he says. Other people can see him very clearly, but this group of people seem to not be able to see what's.
But it's the sticking that makes the
That's
thing.
the thing.
It's not
exactly right.
It's the question how make something stick is already posed in the ontological way that we should not look at if you want to understand Barad. We need to think about the stick in the mix. So Trump exists as a result of this sticking, because if it wasn't him, it would have been probably
somebody else.
something on the line.
Yeah, right, yeah. But that is,
I
why do you
see-
think
I
that's
see-
not Barad? I think
Sorry?
that is what she's saying.
No, I was just saying that why something stick is not the Barad way. The Barad way, how the sticking makes the something.
Oh yeah, how the sticking makes something. Yeah. No, I totally agree. Yeah, the why question is always bad in that sense. Yeah, but particularly in the broad move to it. But it's also true with the referendum. I mean, the same kind of phenomena seems to be happening. In not to be too horribly broad. Not going to be horribly broad. I mean, this referendum was fought in the most racist, small-minded way. Yet there are very few voices that are. People just seem to be going, well, the majority said this. Might as well stick with it. It was like, well, not really. The majority really didn't say this because they really thought they were voting. If they thought they were voting not in a racist, nationalist, neo-fascist way, if they actually thought they were doing something positive, they couldn't possibly have understood, if it's about understanding, which of course it's not, this moment of what the Brexit cut means. And so how does that establish itself?
But to me, what think of it, I didn't think of it earlier, but since we brought the problem of the apparatus and Barad and questions together with the Brexit and the American elections, I believe the Brexit and American election are, the Brexit has shown, the American election is showing a shaking up or a breaking of the existing apparatus.
Yes.
So, and this was the mistake that was made by the so-called Remainers.
Yeah.
They did not see
Yeah.
that their position no longer had the strength it would have had a year or two ago.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I very much fear that Trump will win no matter what he does and says.
Yeah.
I also think it's around how these big issues are framed within a very simplistic binary framework.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that and because that framework then don't allow for the complexity to actually kind of what's going on. People just fall in line.
I don't know. I mean, I know people, I've talked to people in the States, for example, who can use the Trump thing, who are well-educated, interesting people, black, white, different groups, who are thinking of voting for Trump. And you're like, seriously?
Difference.
Because they're thinking this is like countercultural. Well, it is countercultural, that is, an understatement. But it's like you're saying, it's a breaking of the apparatus. So when he says, I break the status quo, he doesn't mean like a right wing or a left wing. He means the apparatus as it's established.
But that's why I think we should not think of the
Of him
apparatus
being- yes.
of informing the phenomenon. It's always the two things together, and
Yes.
sometimes you
Yes.
perceive a delay in one of the two, maybe, but.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe we are witnessing this political shift in UK, maybe because people, like society, became more fascist in the last years and decades, and this just happened because maybe people in this specific time place resemble how the bourgeoisie was in other time places where fascist states arose, and probably it was just the more and more likely to happen. Like, it wasn't destined to happen, but like if you didn't change the pattern, this was becoming the more and more likely, and probably just happened now. Could have happened 5 years before or later, maybe if something radical in the pattern of the society didn't change.
It is remarkable how a lot of the crisis began because of the famous banking crisis, which was then shifted into austerity. And so a lot of the reactions, at least from sort of working middle class people, was against the austerity, and from the upper classes it was against the attack on the banks, or the ability to do a very specific kind of.
But I think
even that's too simplistic. And anyway, the reason I raise this is not to necessarily get in debate about the political, which I think is very important on one level, but is to think how complex it is. Even when we're looking at this and we're trying to reduce them into the question of discourse, question apparatus, and then when you throw in, like, let's say, reality on some level, you see how complicated it gets. How do we really talk about these apparatus? I think that your point is very important here about how they're symbiotically related or something, but even that still brings in a binary. So I'm trying to get us to think complexly sexually, politically, sensuously, maybe is a better word. Stuart, what do you think?
Yeah, no, that was kind of what I was thinking about in this introduction. That in a way, it's kind of a red herring that she sets us off looking for that truth. You know, was Bohr right?
Yeah.
Was he wrong? But actually, it is that complexity, and she sort of frames it up almost. You've just got so many parts. You know, she begins to paint a scenic picture, almost like birds singing and that sort of thing. And then she begins to add in the layers of and sort of threads of intrigue. You know, who sent somebody letters, and even within the letter writing, you've got Bohr writing and rewriting supposedly, and then that work goes into an archive. Who knows what happened to it when it went into the archive? You know, what wasn't put in the archive, and it is just, and yet somewhere in there we're sort of encouraged through our education or whatever to look for an either or but it is just it's the complexity.
I love that she gets so frustrated at the end because he sort of leaves it on this note of just kind of suspension. He doesn't ever answer any questions, and she's like, no,
Yeah.
These things have material impact, and we need to know why, how rather than not why.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So it's that sort of intermingling, isn't it?
Well, it's that entanglement question, which I wasn't sure we were going to get into today. But I mean, I have the collected works of Einstein. Most of them are in English, not all. And what's interesting about, they're mainly the letters, and they're like 12 volumes. I mean, it's a huge thing. And they're little things like Einstein had a tendency to get really annoyed at people that he thought were stupid, and he would write them letters explaining to them. He was another diplomat, explaining to what he thought was wrong with them. And they're quite invective, these letters. I mean, they're kind of amazing. And when you follow these letters, they create, it's not so much that they create a sense of who Albert Einstein is, but obviously they do on that level, but they actually get him to shift from his own views on quantum physics, because if he starts to take in the letters the way he gets closer to Bohr, basically, but by accident, because he's backing into it like this. He doesn't want to go there, but he goes there because he's fighting with all these people, whether or not his ex-wives or the daughter he had that he wouldn't acknowledge, and like whatever, all these crazy things that, not crazy, but all these things that go into the picture. That he starts then rethinking them. And you see them coming out through the letters. Now, again, as artists, and I don't mean this I mean it with a little a, not a big A, how do you grab your stuff? What makes it stick? Do we need this whole big apparatus to make sense of is there postmodern art or contemporary art or your own work? I mean, it's exciting stuff, but...
Did you just say, why does it make it stick?
No, I said, what does it matter that it matters? What we spent now 2.5 hours so far. Well, 2 hours.
Does it matter?
And I'm curious, or is it like plastic with a memory? Because you just draw all this, you just go back to your ways of doing your work.
Yeah, but it matters because it's very there's a tautology happening in my mind. Because if there's no consistency, like it's similar way like the you're starting to pick up the names now after 2 hours.
Sophie.
Dane. Explaining
you
it.
Forgot Dane's name?
It hasn't got a consistency. If it doesn't show up regularly, it sort of doesn't have the agency to matter even. So if that makes sense.
Yeah,
at this point.
makes sense. What is agental realism then, from Barad's do you like the term?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah, I do. I'm not sure I fully understand it.
But there was did you bring it up, Sarah? Or somebody brought it up, like it's the intervention which matters, the intervention which brings change, and that's I think what she's trying to put across with agential realism, because if you can make any changes, you can make any arrangements, but if there's not that stickiness, then it probably means that the argument doesn't really work.
I think it goes back to her notion of interaction. On page 33, she talks about the way that they entangled agencies, how a gentle realist framework. Shall I read it actually?
Yeah.
33. It's the third paragraph down. The notion of interaction is a key element of my genteel realist framework. The neologism intra-action signifies the mutual constitution of entangled agencies. That is, in contrast to the usual interaction, which assumes that there are separate individual agencies that precede their interaction. The notion of intra-action recognises that distinct agencies do not proceed, but rather emerge through their intra-action. It is important to note that the distinct agencies are only distinct in a relational, not an absolute sense. That is, agencies are only distinct in relation to their mutual entanglement. They don't exist as individual elements.
Mm-hmm. And what do you make of that?
I think that it all goes to her notion of entanglement, that nothing exists on its own, that each notion is entangled with the other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the question you asked before, but like different things entangle in different ways, and some of them stick. So I think are we trying to answer the question, why does it matter that they're entangled? That's the way I hear it. And it just seems that
no, it's not why does it matter that they're entangled. They're entangled. What does that do?
Yeah.
Is the
why is it important?
Yeah. No, it's not why is it important. Just get rid of why. And just say
why?
That they're in. Because all why questions lead back to God. Okay.
Why?
Oh my God.
See? Okay.
But also, to give another to more material to Tanis for asking why, not only entangled elements matter, but they matter in different ways. So how they are relevant is always local or specific. We're not looking for one description for this art.
And is there specificity of how they matter? Does that require human?
No. However, there's an extremely delicate point for me because on one hand I am very much sensitive to the fact that it is way too easy to go into a post-human, non-human, and we forget that we are.
Which is why she's talking about agential realism, because she doesn't want to get rid of that, right?
But at the same time, there are practices and discourses and there is modes of operating at all levels, and the human is one of them. Which does not mean that is the principal one, but more that it can be excluded as the rest exists independently. The entire independently is an elsewhere, like the famous time hourglass that is irrelevant for us too.
Interesting. Ajana? Oh, I thought you were going to say something.
I have two things. On the remark of the local, I think that is how atmosphere comes into the picture, because atmosphere can be defined in many ways. One could be like tonalized space, of course in this case not necessarily only on the space level, but it's tonalized field. So the fact that it's local, that was kind of reminded of that. No, that is necessary to, but it's just a way to get in.
Okay. Wait, say that again. Say that again. What you said.
He was remarking that it's always local. It always has like some sort of affinity to the way this something appears. It is always in a local way. Not necessarily deep cut, no, but like always in a place, creates a place.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so that is a way into bridging the theory of atmospheres and Barad. And the other thing is, I was thinking that
I don't understand why that bridges that.
because the theory of atmosphere says that you start with the atmosphere, and then that can condense into objects, but also the atmosphere is always a tonalized space. You can't really draw the line, but there's some areas of intensity, and it's a field. It's not because there's an atmosphere that the atmosphere is supposed to work in a linear way forever. It always has a field of application.
Is an atmosphere as a field, could an atmosphere also be a feeling? As opposed to a field, or the field is a feeling?
Yeah, I would say the atmosphere is sensuous, so in that sense, feeling. Yeah.
Okay.
Field.
Okay, I have your point now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the second thing,
Okay.
because one is an ontology, and then when we say the other option, if we call that another ontology, or if we use the folders that were produced within classical ontology, so we say epistemology and ontology together, we cannot try to make sense by using those concepts, but those concepts all belong to that system. So I was just thinking, just out of my mind, what if maybe this mattering, if we want to make it look like an ontology, but being very different, maybe we could call it workology, in the sense that it is based on what works rather than what exists.
Interesting. What do
It's
people
called
think?
emergence, technically.
It's called emergence, technically.
Emergence.
Emergence, yes.
Yeah.
Workology.
I was just thinking, just to make it.
But that's important.
Make
It
it
is
easy.
called emergence, so that you understand. That's what she's talking about in the book. Yeah, that's what makes it work.
But when you say emergence, people would not think of a direction. Like, of course, you can talk about emergence also when it decreases. Like, there's an idea that
No, emergence, it means, especially thinking of artistic practice, one makes the sense of the work and the language that carries this sense in one act. So that the artist, the scientist would never admit as so drastically that they are making the sense and the language at the same time, although Bohr and Barad are tackling this question to me. The problem of the apparatus and the phenomenon is precisely that language and sense are produced in the act of searching, and they carry all their histories, and it's extremely complex and nuanced that there is this production of what was kept separate in one continuous act. While for the artist, to me, is far more obvious that the quality of the artist is to be able to present whatever meaning one wants to present by inventing the language with which one is presenting it. Otherwise, you make a description, an illustration. Now I lost where I started from. So emergence. So it is. You used the word place earlier on. This makes place rather than
Space makes place.
rather than taking place in its existing space. And that's emergence. So it's not coming up from the depth as something hidden that is the equivalent of discovery. Something emerges because it displays properties that were not there before. And properties that belong only to the ensemble that is acting.
But I was just saying, but then to use the term, okay, I understand there's a history of the term, but like to use the term emergence, that makes me think about something that actually does emerge. So it's a.
It is one of the, if you like, unfortunate metaphors of scientific language. It very often adopts expressions that are loaded outside science or are loaded in language themselves, and without seeing the consequences. Yes, it seems that something is coming up.
Whereas like the little trick I was proposing is that if you say workology as opposed to ontology, it's a way of saying we're not starting from something that exists, we're starting from the work.
The practice, yes.
So in that sense, whereas if I put on one hand ontology, on the other hand I put emergence, still the emergence could be imagined with a ground from which
But
it.
by work, you see, I was thinking you said practice, but that could be easily praxology. You know, the praxis, you know, the way in which practice and. But you're talking about the work, like a work of art, right?
Not necessarily.
No,
like
It's
because
about
because-
sorry. That's
Yeah.
working.
So
Okay.
the difference is at stake here to me, this is very important. One shifts aesthetics from the encounter with an object
Mm-hmm.
to the process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I see that this is quite shared by a lot of the things I've been saying.
We're sort
And-
of circling back around to diffraction.
I was going to say the
So-
same thing.
Yeah.
Because
See, you have worked together. Okay.
Because it's back to the title, isn't it? The meeting the universe halfway, which is kind of a bit of a simplification, but it's these waves that.
This is where Marcus Wright, the publisher, came in and said, "I'm sorry."
Yeah.
No
I
one's
think somebody
understand.
just lifted it out
That's
of
right,
that poem,
that's right.
wasn't it? They just said,
She
"Oh,
just
that
took it
sounds-"
from the poem.
Yeah, well, did she or the publisher? But yeah,
Someone did.
she probably had another title. or something.
Yeah, that's right.
But emergence has that sort of feeling of a single thing, doesn't it? Whereas
Yeah.
I think diffraction works better because it articulates the multiplicity of what's happening and the interrelation and the fact that it's not.
Yeah, it's suggesting something happening rather than a collision. In diffraction, you might just see it as a sort of coincidence, but a collision where it's an emergence from that
Mm-hmm.
process of diffraction. Is that what
No, that's not what I'm saying here. Because then you sort of get into the ways that then diffraction alters things. Whereas I think she's talking about diffraction as the work. Does that make sense? It's the thing that.
But it's
the
that
engine.
altering, not the emergence.
Sorry.
It's the altering, not the emergence. It's the emergence, not the altering. Actually, there could be both of those, right? Diffraction and altering. But yes.
The emergent diffraction.
Oh,
and
yeah.
altering.
Yeah, and the meeting halfway.
That's more I think about that.
Now, just one more clarification about emergence. The first place where I encountered it, which does not mean it is where it originates, is in thermodynamics, where particles in a gas, one by one, you don't feel them, but if you've got many in a contained space, they generate pressure, like a balloon, for example. So that then you have a property which does not belong to any of the individual particles, but belongs to the ensemble.
It's the same as
This-
temperature.
Temperature.
It works
In
out.
this sense, one speaks of emergence, something that has emerged because it is an assemblage or something going on, and whatever has emerged belongs to the entirety of the thing. It's not. You cannot break. If you break it down, you destroy it.
Yeah.
So it might have to do with diffraction, but
I'm thinking more now than from saying that. It's what I've been playing with a bit with the hashtag, how the hashtag can operate in a social media sense. That when you begin to take the parts out of it, or a Venn diagram is a simpler way of seeing it. If you break it down to, you just end up with those parts that don't sort of, but you can sort of. It's difficult because you get into creating boundaries in a way, but maybe those boundaries can be fuzzy. Maybe that's where the
you
difference
do
between.
create boundaries in the sense. Barad reiterates a few times, speaking of Bohr apparatus, that the apparatus draws boundaries. And actually she takes it goes all the way back to Foucault. It's something that creates separations rather than represent separations that are absolute.
Yeah.
Create organizations.
So it organises rather than.
Yes. Organizes before and after, for example. Or organizes here and there.
So dualities, you're talking about?
Dualities, pluralities, and it doesn't have to be two. But,
Okay.
the modern apparatus, according to main, is one that creates duality. Others might create different ones.
So it's like an emergent distribution rather than a prescriptive one.
Yes. in the sense that it is not reflecting something that exists absolutely. So then, to me, when you go back to the notion of taking the phenomenon as the first unit, then you have this emerged distribution, which, as Roberto kept saying, is always reciprocal as your prime.
That's my stomach. Obviously the chocolate didn't do as a meal.
I think maybe page 72, that's where this, what you were saying, Sarah, possibly in terms of diffraction. So it's a Haraway quote. I'm not sure where it is on the page. The diffraction pattern does not map where differences appear, but rather maps where the effects of differences appear.
Yeah.
Does that sort of fit with,
Yeah.
if anybody can say this?
14 lines down.
Sorry?
14.
14, like, right, okay. It's very specific.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. Because I think diffraction also says to me, well, I mean, the sort of scientific definition of emergence also says multiplicity, but it's multiplicity in a certain frame, I guess. Whereas diffraction speaks more of the consequences of it, or perhaps, or it allows for the possibilities of consequence, or for the actualities of consequence, in fact, because we know that things do have consequences.
So where in that does the organising come in? Sort of organising that you were talking about, Matthias. Where would that fit into that sort of model that Harold from that?
Well, the fractional pattern does not map where differences appear, but rather maps where the effects of the differences appear. Organizes in the effects and the repetition. It is, in my understanding, in the fact that something is relevant, so therefore the relation of causality here becomes reversed. Rather than having the cause that exists per se and maybe produces an effect, you have something that becomes a cause once it produces an effect.
Yeah.
And the effect gives legitimacy. What is the quote I read earlier, which I now lost, where they said the electron is used as a tool, therefore it is taken as real because it can produce consequences.
At the start of the chapter, chapter 4.
So earlier, Dane was saying about, mentioned the fact that there is an element of installing a logic or a system that allows you to repeat the experiment and therefore to get the same result and have an ontology there. That's precisely what happens in this notion of effect that is here, I think. You have what others call ontological emergence. You have something, the world comes to exist precisely because you have the coming together, the cohering of a phenomenon, an apparatus that has gathered things in some way or another, and this remains and continues and produces more. If it is a one only, it's just a chaotic disorder.
A couple of lines down on page 72 it says that, 7 lines down, diffractions are attuned to differences that our knowledge-making practices make, and the effects they have on the world. That says a similar sort of thing.
What page was that then?
72. 7 lines down.
Below what we just read on the book.
Yeah.
Diffraction.
Does she talk more about that sort of reversal of causality? I mean, she must do, because I think she states somewhere in the introduction that causality needs to be rethought.
It's not like
In
reversal
relation
of like
to
cause and effect, but I think for me what she tries to point out is the reciprocity of this process. You know, that they're linked and it's a feedback loop, like essentially, you know, like, you know, one thing emerging, you know, moving to something else, if you can divide it like that in time, you know, like, and they're in constant play and reconfiguration, so you just it keeps iterating itself and changing.
Yeah,
It's just that when you say feedback loop, the loop makes one think about a closed some sort of.
No, but the point is that no, feedback loops is not closed. If, for example, if you think about sound, you know, like if you like introduce like a variant, even a very small variation, like, you know, like on sound, for example, if you introduce like a second sound, they intertwine, and the pattern which emerges, it's not, you know, it's not prescriptive, you know, like it really fluctuates, you know, like quite, I mean, it has a degree of consistency, but it's not totally closed also. So like for me, that the sound feedback loops, you know, if you sit down and just like, I don't know, put a microphone next to a speaker, you know, like, and try to
It's just that it seems like it creates a spiral line, but still a line somehow. Whereas I think the point is that the phenomena create the space and time, the space-time together. So it's not that it breaks with the linear causality, because it breaks with the axis of space and time that pre-exists the phenomena. So it's the phenomena that creates space and time. And to like, for me, an example is that let's say in history of art, any kind of history of art, something that becomes part of history of art also creates the predecessor. Is that an English? Predecessor. Yeah. So a new writer, a new something that becomes somehow important for someone, creates the predecessors. So it does not only interfere or put some limits that will channel in some ways the way in which art will develop in the future, but also reconfigures the image of the history of art. Any new thing creates present, future, and past together. So a new Kafka creates new predecessors of Kafka. A new whatever creates predecessor and creates lines and narratives in all direct, like in present
like
time.
a time ripple to all of the directions.
But that's why it's important to who some of you mentioned. I was asking about causality. Causality traditionally is presented and thought of as a line, where you have one original cause and then one effect, and at the most it turns out from one point. In this case, instead, from each effect, you can go in many different directions that which are not necessarily pre-stated. And you can also go nowhere. So it opens up in a network thing where effects can rejoin and diffract or not.
Or entangle.
And they can be, it can also open up simultaneously in different directions. So you do not only have one expansion, but several at different speeds, different distances. So in this sense, the diffraction speaks very much on how one invents by making art.
The causality thing also goes back to the two-slit experiment, where I think under certain circumstances the particle can either choose to be a particle or a wave depending on how you look at it. And so there's the causality sort of element of that, in that, because it has to make the decision of what it's going to be before it passes through the slit. I think is this right? Resident physicist.
That's Barad. I didn't get it.
No, I don't think it's necessarily explicit in Barad.
But does the particle really decides, or just?
Well,
Isn't it influenced by the matter around it?
No, it's a phenomenon. it's the thing. The phenomenon is the non-divisible thing. So it's just wrong to say the particle or the wave. It's the phenomenon. So the apparatus and the phenomenon together that will get you the result particle, the result wave. Although it's difficult to picture, that's the bottom line. So we should force ourselves not to think about a pre-existing particle or wave. And that is it's sort of like the point in which this system gets very far away from common sense and the way in which we think most of the time, and that's where I think the use of this system is local. Also the use of this model is, I would say, local in the sense not that it doesn't apply, but like can I use this knowledge for deciding something that can be described in a better way through classical ontology?
The problem with using the term local is that this key feature of entanglement is that it is non-local. It's that it can be anywhere that, but they're two particles, whatever, are the same, that they're instantaneously connected. It doesn't matter with regards to time space. It's not about that sort of locality. They're entangled, they're together, no matter where they are, how they move. So using the term local is going to break that.
Would you suggest another term? Because I think that this model is fantastic, but at the same time I think this has to be used and cannot be used for everything. Like you can't really stick to this for your day. Like you can't spend 20 hours in a row making sure that you don't fall into identity or assuming that things exist in a spatialized time, because it would be very difficult to do anything to survive, I suppose, even just to pay a purchase. In that sense, I meant local, but like if you have like another term.
But I believe that you are talking about a problem from two different angles. You're speaking of the specific scientific entanglement of quantum physics, and you are taking it more on the model for thinking that Barad proposes from that.
Yeah, because I'm not interested in the specificality of the quantum physics, because it doesn't relate for what matters to me.
So probably the problem is precisely how Barad and how we can pass from that to this interpretation. Which I didn't get. Which I didn't. I'm not doing an analogy because that she says it's not what she's doing, and it would be wrong to interpret it like that, and it would be useless to have just an analogy. But I haven't really understood it. I mean, I understand it when it comes to say how the something matters, how it matters, and for whom it matters. That makes sense to me. But how one goes from the specific problem of reading the particles or the waves going through this that I don't get.
But they matter in a very real, material sense to us, in that we're surrounded by the results of that all of the time. Like LED lights are not possible without, well, they are a quantum application. Solid state drives. So more and more, that sort of very, very micro, which we, as beings of a certain size, find it so difficult to relate to, becomes part of our everyday world, I guess. And so, as that happens, I think it makes more and more sense for us to understand what's happening on that level.
I don't think it's really that important. I think this will be important also with a technology that doesn't show any quantum behavior for the naked eye. I think that this is important as a paradigm in general. Like the reason why I'm interested in this book and these ideas has nothing to do with actually how LED functions. Like I'm really not interested in that. But still, I think I think it's important because I think we need to make sure that we are not doing philosophy with the crowds of science or with the crowds of technology or whatever, and so it's an open problem, I think.
But then it's a very subtle thing to grasp then. You're absolutely right. The problem is not to refer to the finding of science as an empirical proof for a new model to apply throughout. And one has to understand that science is telling us that there are things that are not possible. So science makes a demonstration of impossibility. We do not get to the thing itself. What we have is always something that is the phenomenon, which is not a synthesis. It is in my research I call it degree of roughness. It's a form of organization which is finite and exists as is. And if you look at it, you just find more degrees of roughness in there. You can divide it as much as you like. And at that point, you have to turn around and say, well, then ontology or any question regarding sense can no longer seek an ultimate answer, because it's the very point of ultimate answers as being a bit hollow. And then how you work to make sense at the macroscopic level or at the present level instead of the original one. That for me becomes a question.
I don't have anything really further to add to that other than I need to read the rest of the book.
Because otherwise the split between the 2 points that Dane and Alberto remains. Yes, it is not local, it is precisely something that exists outside the time and space, and yet at the same time diffraction is precisely what is heterogeneous, because it is the consequences that one effect is having any further effects. You can never reduce it to an original point. Otherwise you would have to have the deep cut or the totalization, which is the symmetrical.
And I made a note sort of early on saying this is not just a science book. So it's a primer on how to perform transdisciplinary research. And by understanding diffraction, we would understand how to study.
What page was that?
Oh, that was just me thinking.
Oh, right.
And is that in a way not what we've got to do? It's almost we've got to fold this, what she's discussing here, back onto, to simplify it greatly, what Alberto's saying, what Dane's saying, but where they're coming from are evolving from their own diffraction fields that may be in different planes or different temporalities. I don't know if that's getting a bit too spatial at times, but just trying to sort of turn it into a diagram just to help get around it. But it's sort of looking at how those, what's being altered or how it's altering in the overlapping of the meeting of the waves from those areas, and that is about how, like you just said, Sarah, about how you go about researching. It's that understanding of how where these things have come. Not come from. How they're happening.
But also, where since you used come from, how they're happening, and where that how takes them to. Takes them to. Really, what to me is, maybe it's subjective, but it's my interpretation of what the most important element I hear in this is that the question, rather than being the why question that Father was asking, which goes backward because you need to find a cause to the previous effect, to the previous, and then a cause to that cause, and a cause to that cause, and then you inevitably arrive at asking the question of why there is something rather than nothing, and then you can't answer that. Instead, Barad and Moody's move, Stanges does the same thing. you turn it the other way around, 180 degrees, and says, well, I've got this thing, which is always already complex. It has an history. It is the result of a way of asking questions which has shaped the instruments for asking the questions, or it is a result of a tradition that has seen art as mostly visual. So now a lot of approaches, a lot of reactions to that have been to do something that, look, just thinking of the art history of art in the 20th century, that was either non-tangible or played around with the notion of the author of that. So you know, Dada and the conceptual, for example. Then the medium problem disappears, and then you have an art that borders visual communication because we no longer look at it poetically enough. So you have all these things that have happened before, which that if you try to retrace them, they sort of fade off in the midst of indifferentiated lack of memory or whatever. But the present has its history is here, and then you can move from that. And if I address these, asking one kind of question will take me possibly here, asking a question in different terms. In the other, I don't know if you have seen the piece that Alberto made last year with the GIF of the waiting spinning circle of the Morandi painting. So you took the image of Morandi's painting.
Maybe we can see it. It's my turn.
Yeah,
I don't have her password.
Oh, my
No, like yeah, you can go on my website. It's there.
Okay. Hold on, I'll just get it. Because I've got code. Okay. Just add one.
Oh, right.
Oh, you don't need to be on that. I just ignore it. I've got just search.
So it's a bit of maybe a cheesy sort of pun on the wave thing, but is this kind of in a way about surfing the wave rather than going, oh, what caused the wave? Was it the moon? Is it changing? Or where's the wave going to end up on the rocks? It's that surfing and seeing where you go with it. So you're not chasing it, and you're not ahead of it because
it's not surfing as in going with it. It's seeing that a wave, there are multiple waves, and when they overlap, and the diffraction, they might cancel each other out or enter in a resonance and add to each other.
Yeah.
So then you have phenomena of emergence which generate properties that were not there before.
It's actually you who made it.
Yeah. Sorry. Well, you had the idea. I did just the techie bits.
So you have a multiplicity of elements coming into play at the same time.
It's really interesting, actually, the effect that piece has, because like whenever you see that spinny circle, you just immediately tense up. Then you're like, oh, when's it going to end?
Yeah, it is a bit sadomasochist.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to make your viewer uncomfortable, but you're better.
Well, usually not, but I think.
Could be pleasurable.
So why were you talking
Well,
about?
because one could, you came to Birmingham. I remember one of the first things you said was painting has to do with space, otherwise it's not painting. And I thought, oh, that's quite a specific traditional position to assume regarding painting. But then at the same time, it might make sense. But if you think like that, then you're still stuck in a problem of either representation or the modernist medium, where you discuss what's figure, what's background, and you don't have much more to do with that. Instead, here, you've taken the old mystique of Morandi being contemplative and the contemplation of the same and almost metaphysical and so forth, and then you took something that from an entirely different field and put them together, and there is irony, and there is the time of Morandi. The time of Morandi's painting becomes your material, plus the gift is my reading of it. So things have merged to make a new piece of work emerge.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about that, it's because I was saying like being Italian, coming from this artistic background, I was just saying, Americans historically they had no issues presenting stuff that was absolutely no representation of, not showing any sort of illusion of depth, whereas Italians like needed to kind of readjust to that. I think that kind of this thing, that the fact that I shifted from looking at that thing at looking at where's the paradox. It's a bit describes a bit the research that happened in the between of when I started and the point in which I am now. I can still understand the issues I had. It's just that as reconfigured, and now space is actually the gap in space now has become a gap in dimension. I don't know. I don't think that is important or relevant.
What do you mean by gap in space and gap in dimension?
Because at the beginning I was still feeling like the painting, like it was culturally, I just felt painting needed to have some sort of ability to be immersive, and so it was a sort of a hollowing or something. Something should have happened in different planes that I could understand a painting to work either immersively or as an emergence, but not like in a stasis sort of way. Like if you take a monochrome by Yves Klein, I was perceiving that as taking over the space around. So there was always a movement. So in that sense, I got what was the question?
You said a gap in space or a gap in dimension.
Yeah, and now I don't see that binary anymore. Like I don't see that it's necessary to have an actual immersive or immersive perception for that painting to be an artwork to be working. Now I see that it's just what was important is to have some sort of paradox going on, and that creates enough room for an attunement.
There's a bit somewhere around 27, 28, I think. I don't know the exact quote, I'm sorry, I should have written it down, but what I wrote was that she describes diffractive methodology, and in particular Bohr's insights, as providing a way to discard the epistemological shortcuts and cultural assumptions and frameworks regarding representation and anthropocentrism. So I wonder if you were using that without even knowing that you were, maybe.
Page 29.
Was it page 29? Okay.
Where she starts speaking of diffraction versus reflection.
Whereabouts was that?
Page 29. Halfway to the page at the beginning of the chapter. Moving down. I believe that's a...
What, furthermore from there?
Yes. Can you read it?
So I don't know if this was... Okay, I kind of maybe summarised it a little bit. I'll read it, I'll see if I can find what I was meaning. Furthermore, as I explained in chapter 2, diffraction turns out to be an apt material and semiotic figuration for the methodological approach that I use and develop. There's a long history of using vision and optical metaphors to talk and theorize about knowledge. The physical phenomenon of reflection is a common metaphor for thinking. A little reflection shows this to be the case.
Yes.
Donna Haraway proposes diffraction as an alternative to the well-worn metaphor of reflection. As Haraway suggests, diffraction can serve as a useful counterpoint to reflection. Both are optical phenomena, but whereas reflection is about mirroring and sameness, diffraction attends to patterns of difference. One of her concerns is the way reflexivity has played itself out in methodology, especially as it has been taken up and discussed by mainstream scholars in science studies. Haraway notes that reflexivity or reflection invites the illusion of essential fixed position, while diffraction trains us to more subtle vision. Is that what I was? There was something definitely about anthropocentrism as well.
It's on page 27, isn't it?
Is it?
Problem of humanism.
Yeah.
Bohr's remnant humanism. Yeah.
Where?
In the middle. On the contrary.
Oh yeah, that's it. Yes, I did actually highlight it, funnily enough. Yeah, so on the contrary, humanism takes for granted much of what needs to be investigated. Yeah. Scholars in science studies have a very different set of concerns. Their disavowal of humanism is based on an interest in the way in which the human and its others, for example, including machines and non-human animals, are conceptualized, produced, and reworked through scientific and technological practices. And then there's a really lovely bit that actually plays really beautifully into my work, which is, needless to say, they don't have to dig very far to find justification for their rejection of humanism, since the news serves up daily reminders that science and technology are actively remaking the nature of the human. Indeed, the recent convergence of biotechnologies, information technologies, and nanotechnologies reconfigures the human and its others so rapidly that it is already overloading the circuits of the human imagination.
Can you explain how that reflects on your work? Or diffracts on your work?
Yeah, because I'm sort of talking about that that sort of digital space that we assume sort of lacks a kind of a materiality, and so then it's very difficult to reconcile the sort of everyday bodily experience of the world with this other habitat that we sort of live in. And there is a sense of overwhelm, you know, the information overload, and so what my work is trying to do is to find a way to ground, I guess. And so new materialism is very, very important, as is media theory, exploring different ways of finding that ground. And so I'm looking at errors and things that we would normally sort of discard as not being important. Can they actually give us some kind of an insight into grounding in body?
Why do you want to do grounding?
That's the wrong word, isn't it? I'll think of a different word. When I have better language, it will be a better word.
What would be a better word?
The knowledge, isn't it? Isn't that the knowledge in the way that it
The knowledge.
would-
I was thinking of taxi. No, that's
No, isn't it this kind of knowledge that's in there, which is which needs to be verbalized in a way that it's not.
The knowing, you mean? No, it's okay. So if I explain, I mean, I have Asperger's syndrome, which means that I am able to make the cut between body and mind very easily. So I can exist in this kind of space where I have no concept of my body. So I can go for hours and hours and hours without eating, without going to the toilet, without realizing that my back is killing me, and then suddenly all of that will kick in. Whoa, and I'm happy in that space where there's no sensation and there's no feeling. Where it becomes incredibly uncomfortable for me is when there is sense, because all of this equipment is hyper attuned, oddly, even though I can switch it off. And so there's a pain to actually being in this, and so it's easy for me to go and escape. But escaping up there then has it perpetuates, I guess, a style of thinking which is already very, very discursive, very rhizomatic, which doesn't actually work well, for example, if one is doing something very concrete, like writing a literature review for a PG cert, for example. So, there are very real-world sort of applications to what I'm looking at, because I think to a degree everybody sort of experiences that. I mean, we have moments when we're in the zone when we don't recognise what's going on around us, and I think that as we more and more sort of occupy that digital thinking space, that we need to find a way of bringing those two things together. Or maybe it's just me, maybe I'm just going to find out that actually it's only me who can't do this and everybody else is fine.
But I mean, if there is this digital space and you'd say the real, like the real one, the real world comes with this kind of pain and this sensible way of you entering it or experiencing it. Isn't it like exactly the question then of how this digital space is you can actually embody, or what's there, that, and that's the knowledge I'm talking about, that there is some sort of, that there is an entanglement in a way that whatever comes together in there, or whatever is happening in there, of how this, or what forms it actually takes, and
it is the essentials we were speaking earlier. So that the digital space does not need to have a body, but nevertheless it has dimensions. So it is material as well. Not material as a table.
And it's also non-local.
It's also non-local.
But by having dimension, it is not local in terms of geometric or geography. And by having dimension, it is local, it is its own locality. Because it is heterogeneous versus all set of dimensions, which are also local in their own way. This is the way I understand local.
But Andrea, in your question, you're asking that question because your thesis is trying to look at that which cannot be seen, basically. It's trying to deal with the throwaway that.
And I think it's actually interesting that everyone is so clear about it's an error, like you're saying. That's the meaning we attach to it.
Exactly.
But I think there are completely different takes to it, and I'm just interested of what those different takes might be, and I think it's just the perspective you need to let this happen. And I think.
Well, the ways into it that I'm looking at it are sort of neurodivergence, which is not error, but it is different to the norm. And people still, for the history of neurodivergence is that, it was treated as a mental illness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, you see, and that's exactly with the norm. That's then the trap of the identity, because that's, that's the right way of doing it, and that's like, that it's not, right? And I just try to, how can we overcome exactly this divide of being the norm, and apart from that, that's the error, right?
So this is why this book is really important to my work, because it represents a way of pulling those things together and illustrating that they're not different, or that they are, but they're not.
Or they're not oppositional.
Yeah.
They're not like error, truth. And so then I think one thing that we can add to the mix, because why not, is the word singularity, which has been absent so far in the discussion. But it's not, it's important to think, or it's important to have a sense of how something operates without another side, a backside or a foreside. The vision doesn't divide in that way. There might be cuts. Those cuts are loops, or they are ways in which something may or may not appear. But then that's a different animal than what you're doing, which is I thought, I could be completely wrong, I thought what you were doing was that you were trying to figure out what happens to, or what's the, sort of impact, I don't know the right way of putting this is, of that which doesn't make it into the work of art. So, for example, the things that get thrown away, but maybe that's, no,
I just say
I've made that up.
Yeah, no, I just say that's how you would, that's again, like, the way of how you approach it, right? You could say that this is, that's not relevant, but I don't want to fall into this category of saying it's not relevant to the work of art. It has relevance because it's there, and I try to understand how we can approach it in a way that it has a relevance, not only in a way aesthetically, but
what's the it that you're approaching?
Thing. And I wouldn't
You
even
say thing.
The thing, yeah, the thing, what I see, like this material kind of phenomenon I have in front of me, because I extract particular things, and that's like something you can see. It's like that's the material, or that's, and it's not even, I think, and that's not where it can end. Just say that's the material itself, because that's probably where she's heading over. I might not
When
be.
you say material, do you mean, and you say the thing? I feel like das Ding, and it's like you say the thing. Are you saying what Wittgenstein is saying? Like either you have a methodology like the deep cut, right? And he says there's something wrong with that picture, or you have this sort of thing which could be taken out or put in, but it's not a cut. It's, where does it say in that? Do you remember that passage? Where he has that little crazy, no.
The scribble.
What?
Philosophical grammar.
Yeah.
The scribble? No.
Sorry?
The scribble?
A scribble, it's a scribble. He says this is the picture of how materiality is established. It's not about the deep cut, it's about, you can take this out, put it in, or, see, I'm wondering, when you look at something, is this what you understand as the materiality? Around which, or is this like infinite field of things called the materiality, of which something takes on this sort of boundary? Is that how you're saying it? And you're saying, well, actually it could be bigger than that, or it could be over here. I'm trying to get, what are you saying there with the...
Well, I think I'm not there yet to say where materiality starts, where matter comes in, where the material then sits, I'm just saying that I have particular material artifacts or material phenomena, and they are there, so I want to understand what is happening, and I think to explain or to say it's an error or it's a mistake or it's something that gets discarded and within the process is not enough for me, because I don't think that that's the end of it, or that's like.
So
close
what I
enough.
just described here, which was not a very good way of putting it, I don't think, because in order to understand that this is not explaining a method, not explaining an error, or not explaining a negative, or not explaining a discard, you need a totally different way into the picture. And the picture, if it's a scribble like this, is what Wittgenstein was playing around with, but what Barad is doing is she's trying to picture the reality. She's trying to give you a sense of the reality, as it were, the materiality, that doesn't require a zero-sum game or an error, not error. And that's part of this whole singularity, entanglement, diffraction. So the ground that you're talking about is actually diffraction, is what she's arguing. But that is not really a ground, as in something you walk on. So there's a journal, Parallax, which, by the way, Grace has her cover on it. It's fantastic, anyway. Which was on diffraction, and I suggest you take a look at it. It's by it's Parallax, so I don't know what volume it is, but Karen Teal and somebody else. Remember their name? But she's not the editor of it. No. So there's a number of people who've got pieces in there, myself included, which is the ecce homosexual piece. And the ecce homosexual piece is divided, as a lot of my work is, in terms of numbered somethings, and this numbered something is like diffraction 1, diffraction 2. And it may help, it may not. If you look at that, you may see that what becomes the diffraction is something that isn't being explained logically, in a sense. It's not a logical position. And that's what a lot of the pieces in there are trying to do. So it might help. I don't know if it does. Your turn.
My turn. Say what?
We have 3 minutes.
No, I have a question.
Okay.
You said that we haven't talked about singularity, but actually the question is what's the difference, if there's a difference between singularity and phenomenon?
Wait, what's the difference?
If there is
a difference between
yes.
singularity and phenomenon.
Because the reason why I wasn't thinking about singularity is because I don't see a difference between, like when we say phenomenon, to me that is singularity, but maybe
that's interesting.
I'm just ignorant.
But in the way Barad presents it, the phenomenon is a singularity.
But nobody's used that term, and I wanted to alert you to it, because the term enables a way of, it's just like this term emergence, for example, that does sound like you're coming out from a cave or something. The term phenomena sounds, it rightly brings in the question of multiplicity, where I guess singularity implies a closing down of multiplicity, but in fact it's exactly the reverse. It's a multiplicity that doesn't have another side. So it's fractal in that sense. So it's phenomena, but it's a very specific kind of phenomena. Is that clear?
Yeah, but let's say probably in order to talk about phenomenon with Barad, we need always to think about the apparatus together, so that way you get the fractal in a way. Like.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Okay. Who would like to do chapters? Did we get through chapter 3? No. Okay. Sophie, would you like to do 3?
Okay.
Who was doing 3? I think it was a different.
We went up to 2. We did introduction 1 and 2.
But Ajamo, you checked out chapter 3, or maybe you, Mattia, you were the one that did chapter 3.
No, I wasn't.
It's like I'm innocent. You were doing 1?
Yeah, possibly.
Emily was doing 2.
Emily was doing 2. Okay, let's have Emily do 3 with Sophie. She wasn't able to make the meeting. And who else can we bring in for 4? Don't all jump up at once.
I'm writing the tutorial report since more than a week, so I haven't finished. I don't have time. I might take another week.
Well done. Okay. 4 is crying out to be had. Who wants 4?
I think it's got to be Dane, because she says it's her. The chapters are 4, 5, and 7. I think that are the physicists.
Dane.
They've got to be scientists.
You can volunteer. Is that okay?
Yeah, I've got a few pages notes. So.
Okay, good. Well done. So it's Emily, Sophie, and Dane. And